So good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well today. Thank you for joining us for the second installment of the MCF Inspire Speaker Series. My name is Doug Lieb. I'm a Senior Project Architect with MCF. Inspire is a monthly guest speaker series that we do that explores the intersection between architecture, art, culture, science, and history, providing opportunities for all of us to engage with a diverse group of very talented people. So today, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Steve Cicero. Self-dubbed the History Hobo, Steve is retired from a 38-year career in American history with the Butler School District. But with a natural curiosity about the everyday world around us and how that world came to be, Steve has gone on to involve himself in many organizations, groups, and historical sites around Western Pennsylvania, giving tours and doing speaking engagements about the hidden history that's all around us and in front of us every day. So without further delay, thank you, Steve, and take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. I am the History Hobo, and it'll be my pleasure to share some fun facts and tidbits related to our amazing history here in Western Pennsylvania. My thanks to MCF Architects for the invitation. And we're actually speaking to you from the company offices in the Frick building. Doug and I have virtual backgrounds from the Frick home, Clayton. Doug greeted you from the sitting room, and all of you are now my guests as we chat in the parlor. I tried to include names from all over Western PA, but it'll be clear from the outset that this program is Pittsburgh centric, and there's reasons for that. The early history of the region is dominated by events that occurred around the junction of the three rivers. Pittsburgh is and always has been the largest city in Western Pennsylvania, and nearly all of our region's history has connections to this hub. And finally, we get most of our news from Pittsburgh sources: television, newspaper, radio, online. And so that's where you'll most often hear these names, which is the whole reason for the program. The program is going to move very quickly, so those who are like me and they like to take notes, you might want to wait for the recording. And with that, we'll get started with the show. So the program is titled Western Pennsylvania, What's in a Name? A couple of program notes. Each of these labels represents a different aspect of the program, as you can see here. The presentation is roughly chronological, but we'll take a few detours along the way, which is pretty appropriate considering where we live. The program is a random sample, but by no means does it include all the names we could talk about. We would be here for a long time. I tried to pick some of the best known and some fun stories. So let's get started with this program by beginning at the beginning. The origin is seen in this photo. For many years, I would sit at this red light near my home and wonder who this man, William Flynn, was and why a road is named after him. That led to a broader consideration of how the names of so many ordinary places came to be. So let's start answering that question. We're going to begin at the beginning with the state where we live. The charter for the colony of Pennsylvania was given to William Penn in 1681, but it was actually named for his father, Admiral William Penn. The younger Penn was rejected by his father when he became a Quaker, but they reconciled later in life, and Penn inherited the family fortune. So he came to America to set up a haven for people like himself and people of any faith who wanted to practice it freely. Many products today made in or near our state are named for Penn or for his faith. You can see 3 examples on the screen. On a side note, Pennsylvania is no longer leading the world in oil production, but interestingly enough, it is still considered to be the best motor oil in the world due to the low sulfur content. The nickname Keystone State came about because of our geographic location in the middle of a slightly curving group of 13 English colonies. You can see them on the map on the right. There are 6 below and 6 above us. And the term keystone actually refers to an arch where the key that holds all the other stones in place is the one in the center of the group. Thus, we are the keystone in the colonies. Speaking of geography, nothing has influenced our early history more than the Appalachian mountain chain that runs from Florida all the way into Canada. In fact, it is named for a group of Indians who actually live in Florida. For over 150 years, there was no Western Pennsylvania because there were a few Europeans who ventured beyond this boundary. As you can see on this map, the mountains have influenced the spread of the population in our state, which is fascinating when you look at the white county boundary lines. In eastern Pennsylvania, the boundaries are irregular in size and shape, and those in the center are more elongated and actually curve with the mountains. The western section, which is our focus here in green, are very uniform, and most of the irregularities exist because of the rivers being used as borders. So the sizes are very similar because there's settlement occurring almost all in a very, very short time. And the county names are likewise going to come from a very small slice of the nation's history. Speaking of names, most of you are more than familiar with the rivers that are a very big part of Western Pennsylvania. And they're the most prominent reminder of the indigenous people of this region, because that's who named them. And those names were largely retained by the English settlers who drove them out. Taking a look at a brief chart here, showing you some of those famous rivers that we're also familiar with, and also where the definition came from. These are the Indian names for those rivers. My personal favorites are the otters, the Conemaugh and the Venango, which are Delaware in slang for the otter, and the other one's called Otter Creek. But the biggest of the rivers, and the Indians refer to it as the Great River, is shown here in the center. All of the other rivers on this slide that are around it flow into the Great River. And it's interesting to note that from the Indians' perspective, there were not 3 rivers down here at the point, there were only 2. The Allegheny was considered part of the Ohio. And this is a photograph from Cincinnati, where the Great River flows. Among the indigenous tribes of our area, the most powerful group was the 5-nation Iroquois Confederacy, which controlled most of what is today New York and Pennsylvania. The name Iroquois is often mistaken for a tribe, but it is in fact a language that binds all of those people together. The tribe that dominated the region we now call Western Pennsylvania is the Seneca, which is why you see that name all over our area. They were known as the keepers of the Western Gate. Other tribes, such as the Shawnee and Delaware, for instance, also lived here, but the Seneca called the shots. Interesting news story, Seneca Valley just recently decided to stop using the Indian image for their school district in the top left there, but they will continue to use the name Raiders. For nearly a century and a half, the empires of England and France slowly expanded, but they never came into direct contact, and consequently, they didn't threaten each other until around 1750. The conflict does finally erupt in the land known as the Ohio Country, the land that we now call home. And there it is. The reason they could not coexist ultimately was because both of these empires wanted to control the fur trade, which was basically the only way you could make large amounts of money for the mother countries. There was no gold here, as everyone thought there would be, but there were animal furs, and they were highly valued in Europe because by this time, the old growth forests that sustained these animals, they're long gone. It's going to come as no surprise to anyone in this audience that the most numerous fur-bearing animal in this region is deer. It's estimated, for instance, that 250,000 deer skins were shipped to England every year from the area right around what is today Pittsburgh. Deer skins became the currency of the trade. The value of the trade goods was expressed in deer skins because that was something that the indigenous people could understand when they came to the trading posts. And the other animals are all valued as a fraction of a male deer or a buck. So buck skins become the currency. And so, for instance, if you had 6 raccoons and you came to trade, that would be equal to 1 buck. That's also the origin of the slang term that we today use for the most common currency that we have, the dollar bill. Now, deer were the more numerous, but the beaver were the more valuable. This was probably due to the waterproof nature of their skins, which made them quite unique in what you could make out of them. Hats made from beaver became all the rage in Europe. And given the number of rivers in our region, it's not surprising that beavers were a huge part of the fur trade here. Thus, we have the name beaver quite literally all over the map of Western Pennsylvania. A county, 2 cities, a river, and so many more places. In the contest for control of the fur trade, the French are going to make the first move. They built a fort at Presque Isle near modern-day Erie. I'm sure many of you visited there because today we have a state park in that location. The French then moved down the water to establish 2 more outposts, Fort Le Boeuf and Fort Marchot, seen there. The pushback, interestingly enough, is not going to come from England, but rather from the colony of Virginia, which claims this region. None of the earliest claims had a western boundary. And in the case of Virginia, their northern boundary also extended at a 45-degree angle to the northwest. In other words, thinking in modern terms, Virginia is going to claim half of what we would call the entire continent of North America. The governor of the colony also happens to be the leader of a land speculation company that wants to sell these lands, and the French are messing with this plan. What's the old phrase? Follow the money. The Virginia claim also overlaps land claimed by Pennsylvania, which creates another problem. So the Virginia governor sends 21-year-old George Washington to deliver a letter instructing them to leave, the French that is. The blue signs that we see all over the roads throughout our area mark the approximate route of his travels to and from this mission. The road signs are a commemorative trail. They're not the exact locations. Needless to say, the French are not leaving, but there is another part of the mission that's also important, and that's to promote good relations with the native people here. And Washington did that when he met with Queen Aliquippa. She was the most important native leader in the region. Women, in general, were very important leaders of the indigenous peoples. The modern town is named for her, but it is not near where her people lived. This is a picture of the Governor General of New France. Given my wonderful fluency in French, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the name. I'm going to focus on the middle of it, which is Duquesne. The French forces are going to reach the junction of the 3 rivers shortly after a group of Virginians who are driven off. The French then build another fort. Apparently the important part of the name is the middle, because that's the name they gave to the fort. This is a great aerial photograph showing the large gray brick pavers that are following the outline of the forts that once stood on this spot. The small one in the middle is Fort Duquesne. The funny curve near the fountain is actually the original shoreline before all of the landfill. The name Duquesne appears several times in downtown Pittsburgh, including a very well-known university and a very prominent street along the Allegheny River. After several efforts to oust the French did not go well, Governor Dinwiddie finally convinced the British government to send a real army to get the job done. Unfortunately, that attack led by General Edward Braddock ended in total disaster near the present-day town that is named for him. The following year, British fortunes were changed dramatically when William Pitt became the new leader of the government. His title of nobility gives us the name of another local university, which is quite likely unknown to most of the students who have attended that school, but he was the Earl of Chatham. The Pitt coat of arms should look familiar to any true Yinzer. This is the only city in North America where all the professional sports teams wear the same colors. They didn't always, but eventually they do. In order of when they first donned the black and gold, we have the Steelers, the Pirates, the Penguins, and the Riverhounds. Quick side note, the Penguins decided to join the group when the Steelers and the Pirates both won world championships in 1979. And the Riverhounds, likewise, many years later. True hockey fans are also going to recognize that checkerboard in the middle of the Pitt coat of arms. That's the original colors of the Penguins before they went to black and gold. General John Forbes was chosen to lead a new effort to capture Fort Duquesne, and Forbes is going to cut a new path with his army. You can see that Forbes Road and Braddock's Road are very different. And unlike Braddock, he's going to build a series of forts to provide a place to fall back if things did not go well at any step of the journey. And as you look at that map, you'll see Fort Ligonier, Fort Bedford, and Fort Littleton. That might sound familiar if you've traveled much on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. In fact, those are exits on the Turnpike. The pathway of the Pennsylvania Turnpike from Carlisle all the way to Pittsburgh is Forbes Road. Turnpikes were actually wooden poles that blocked the road until a toll was paid, and they were turned aside, as you can see in the illustration down in the lower left. And the Turnpike, incidentally, was the first interstate highway in the United States, built in 1940. The last fort on Forbes Road was named for the commander of all the British forces in North America, Lord John Ligonier, and the town nearby is one of the many things that is named after him. After the French abandoned Fort Duquesne, Forbes ordered the building of the largest fort in North America. Named for William Pitt, it's going to establish British control of the Ohio country once and for all. The construction of the fort is actually overseen by General John Stanwix, for whom an important crosstown street is named. According to the legend, Forbes stood next to George Washington, up on Mount Washington, as it's now known, and declared that little town growing near the fort should be called Pittsburgh. Now you have to understand, Forbes is Scottish, so we may call it Pittsburgh, but he would have said Pittsburgh. Two other members of the Forbes expedition also have downtown streets named for them, Bouquet and Grant. Grant Street is not named for the Civil War hero and later president, as many people widely assume. John Forbes, of course, provides his name to the most well-known street in the city of Pittsburgh, along with one of the most famous stadiums in professional sports history, Forbes Field. Many great memories were made there, none more iconic than that moment when the homer was hit by Maz in 1960. This photo is taken during that final game of the World Series when they had the victory over the Yankees. Now, we have 4 trivia questions for our audience today. So if you think you know the answer, please type it into the chat and we will come back to them at the end. Where is this picture taken from? It is one of my favorite pictures of Pittsburgh. It's just so dramatic and so fascinating. Where was it taken from? The dispute we referenced earlier between Virginia and Pennsylvania is finally going to be solved, this ownership of the Ohio country, in 1779. And 2 surveyors with very familiar names were hired to determine that final boundary line when Pennsylvania outlawed slavery a year later. That line is going to become the de facto border between the slave states and the free states, the Mason-Dixon line. With a growing population, Pittsburgh was finally incorporated as a city in 1816. The city flag design is recreated from memory because the original drawings were destroyed in the Great Fire of 1845. As you look at that picture, it's hard to imagine that Pittsburgh was once the small village that you see there. The population of Western PA grows rapidly after the American Revolution, and new counties are going to be added quickly. As seen here, many of them were named for well-known people of this time period. In the case of Indiana, it represents all the indigenous peoples, but the rest of them are individual leaders from that time. Here we have 4 of them, just examples of the military leaders of the Revolution that now give their names to counties: Armstrong, Crawford, Greene, and of course, Fayette. I'm rather embarrassed to admit that it was only recently I actually connected Fayette with Lafayette. Who knew? Like many other counties, the one I live in, Butler, was created in 1800, in that time frame, when it was separated from Allegheny, and it is named for General Richard Butler, another Revolutionary War hero. Common street names from this era in Western Pennsylvania reflect the history here, and they still do today. On the left, you can see famous presidents. Almost every town has those names as streets. On the right, famous military, business, and political leaders. Now, I decided to test that theory, and I looked at a map of my own home. I just did this a few days ago, and I actually found out that it is indeed true. In Butler, Pennsylvania, every single one of those names is a street, with the one exception, Oliver Hazard Perry. So there you go. While we are in Butler County, let's take a look at some famous names that originated there. There's a wealthy German baron who arrived in 1802, bought some land, and established a settlement named for his daughter, who had herself adopted a nickname based on her favorite doll. She was known as Zelie Bassie. Now, when Zelie announced to her father that she was betrothed to a man named Philip Passavant, Detmer said that he would only approve the marriage if the couple settled in his new village. And so they do. They arrive in 1807, built a small home and store, and later built this home in 1809, the Passavant House. The Passavant name, of course, should be very familiar to us in Western Pennsylvania. This couple will be blessed with many children, and among them was William. He's going to become a prominent religious leader who also created several healthcare facilities, such as Passavant Hospital. Stroll just up the street, a few houses, and we're going to meet the Buell family, who settled around that same time, Christian Buell being the first. He built this house, still standing, the Buell House. That should be a familiar name to generations of us who live in Western PA. Frank Buell, one of their children, is going to make his name in the steel industry in the Shenango Valley and build this beautiful mansion in Sharon, Pennsylvania. It should look slightly familiar, the style of it, because it is the same architectural style, the Richardson Romanesque style, that graces the county courthouse here in Pittsburgh. Untold numbers of children from all over Western Pennsylvania have fond memories of a visit, or maybe several, to the Buell Planetarium on the north side of Pittsburgh. Another favorite stop for shoppers in Pittsburgh for many decades was the legendary Boggs and Buell department store, named for 2 best friends from Zelie and Opal who created it, Russell Boggs and Henry Buell Jr. The year 1812 saw the United States once again at war with Britain. One famous battle involved this captain who was mortally wounded during the engagement. His dying words became a battle cry for the American Navy. Don't give up the ship, which, by the way, his crews promptly did as soon as he died. Well, nevertheless, he is remembered today because a town named Lawrenceville was created the same year as his death in battle. Also that same year, Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, in the months following Lawrence's death, travels to Lake Erie and builds a fleet of ships to challenge the British on the Great Lakes. His flagship was named the USS Lawrence. It was severely damaged in the battle, and Perry transferred his flag, his battle flag, which was Lawrence's quote, it contained those famous words, to another ship, the USS Niagara, which still can be seen in Erie today. Perry's legendary victory is going to give America control of the Great Lakes and permanently ended any threat of invasion from Canada. Now, you might assume that Lawrence County would be named for the captain, but in fact, it's named for Perry's flagship at the battle. As seen in this fascinating photo, that sunken ship was found many decades later, still sitting at the bottom of Lake Erie, 1875. As for Perry, his name is seen all over Western Pennsylvania in countless incarnations. It might be the most popular name in the show today. Perryopolis, 2 high schools, and Perry Highway. And there's a large, wonderful mural on a building located very near Perry High School in the Brighton Heights neighborhood. As the region around Pittsburgh becomes a center of industry, it begins to draw immigrants from all over Europe, including the German-speaking states. There is no nation of Germany at that time. One of those states was named Saxony. And from Saxony, a group of settlers come seeking a new life. Like so many before them, they started a village and they named it for the home that they left behind. That's where a lot of our village and town names came from, the place they left behind. This map shows the original layout of this new village, Saxonburg, which is little changed from the earliest days. The leader of the group was John Roebling, and along with his brother Carl. John fancied himself a farmer, but he quickly realized that wasn't his future, and he went back to his original training, which was as a civil engineer. In fact, he became a civil engineer at the age of 16. After perfecting steel wire rope and revolutionizing the hauling of huge weight loads, Roebling is going to turn his attention to building bridges with them. He invented the concept of a suspension bridge with steel cable. His most famous project was once known as the East River Bridge, but now we know it by its more common name, from the city that it connected New York to, the Brooklyn Bridge. In Saxonburg today, you can find a replica of that famous bridge in a park of the same name. And right next door is Roebling's workshop. Now, by the mid-1800s, Pittsburgh takes its place as an industrial powerhouse. Leading that charge are a truly remarkable number of men who are going to become household names, not only here, but around the world. First among them was Andrew Mellon, the son and the partner of Thomas Mellon, the founder of Mellon Bank. The original building seen here on the lower right. Today in Pittsburgh, 2 parks and a very visible skyscraper are named for that family. As I was doing this program, it occurred to me as I'm doing the research over and over and over again, there was a name that kept appearing, not on buildings necessarily, but in the background. For well over a century and a half, the Mellon family has been a driving force for civic and business improvements in Pittsburgh and the region far beyond. So they may not often have their name on it, but there are very few things that did not have a Mellon involved in their making. And many of you may even recognize some of the members of this legendary family, and their legacy here in Pittsburgh cannot be understated. The genius of the Mellon family is their uncanny ability to see a great opportunity and immediately seize it. This was never more clearly demonstrated than the speed with which that family entered the oil business. In 1901, there's a gigantic oil strike at Spindletop, Texas, and it opened up an entire new region for oil investment, free of the Rockefeller monopoly of Standard Oil. Within months, Andrew Mellon and his nephew, William Larimer Mellon, had become the primary investors in a giant new venture named for the Gulf of Mexico. The headquarters of the Gulf Corporation became the Gulf Tower, built in 1932, and the company was among the top 10 most valuable corporations in America for most of the 20th century. And the Gulf building, of course, is legendary for the top of it. Every visit we made to Pittsburgh when I was a child, I would always look at the building at night to see what color it was, predicting the weather. Many of you may have that memory as well. The Civic Arena, once called the Mellon, was renamed for the Mellon family and was one of the most recognizable buildings in the country until it was replaced by the PPG Paints Arena. PPG makes paint, yes, but their original business was the production of plate glass. That was where the PPG comes from, Pittsburgh Plate Glass. Here you can see Ford City, which is named for the company founder, and also the location of a Pittsburgh plate glass factory for many years. Today, Pittsburgh is home to the remarkable PPG building and nearby Plaza, which is one of the most popular destinations in the city year-round, but especially in the winter. The outer skin of that building is fascinating. It contains nearly 20,000 individual panes of glass. Imagine that. H.J. Heinz. There is no better example of a brilliant businessman, civic benefactor, and good employer than this man. I admire him tremendously. He supported the Pure Food and Drug Act because he hated losing business to people who sold garbage in a bottle. An example would be ketchup. That wasn't really ketchup, it was sawdust that was stained red. Imagine that. He gave his workers a fair wage, good benefits, and safe working conditions. Rare at that time. While he made a fortune selling quality goods and giving back in large measure to the city that made him famous. He started out selling pickles that he grew in a garden behind his home. With his mother's blessing, he put them in a wagon and took them out and sold them. Eventually, he makes a fortune, but he actually sold over 60 products. Yet you see 57 on the label of everything. Well, it turns out that 5 was his favorite number and 7 was the lucky number for his wife. That's how we get the 57. The new football-only stadium is named for the Heinz Company, as is the largest museum in Western Pennsylvania. It's not named for H.J. Heinz, it's named for his grandson, Senator John Heinz III, who died tragically in a plane crash while serving as the senator from Pennsylvania. The History Center is named for him. Second only to Thomas Edison as a holder of registered patents is George Patton. He lit up our world with his invention of alternating current. There's a great new movie, which I haven't had a chance to see yet, that just recently came out called The Current Wars. It's on my list. And he saved countless lives with his first great invention, the one that actually started his fortune, an air brake for the use on locomotives. Today, we remember Westinghouse in a variety of places across the city and the region. Westinghouse Park sits on a former site of the Westinghouse Mansion in Point Breeze. Unknown to most visitors, there's actually 2 tunnels under the park that Westinghouse once used to secretly travel to his laboratory in the carriage house and to the nearby train station down the hill. There's also a memorial bridge and, of course, a high school named after this famous man. Henry Phipps made his fortune as a partner in the Carnegie steel business and the second largest shareholder. He built the Phipps Conservatory and then donated it to the city of Pittsburgh. Today, it is a very popular destination for visitors year-round and a lovely place to see in the fall and the spring in particular. Conservatories generally speaking, were very popular with these rich businessmen, and nearly all of them had one or more at their estates. Henry Heinz, it's said, had 7, where he tried out new food products. Phipps is also responsible for one of the most beautiful buildings on the Pittsburgh skyline. He and his brother played on the riverbank at this location and watched steamboats pass by. And so he constructed this building named for Robert Fulton, who, believe it or not, started a steamboat factory in Pittsburgh only 5 years after inventing the very first one in New York. In 1812, Fulton's boat, built here in Pittsburgh, called the New Orleans, became the first steamboat in history to make a round trip to that city and return to Pittsburgh. Henry Frick made a fortune in the coal and coke business in Connellsville when he became a partner of Andrew Carnegie, and he became one of America's richest men because of that jointure. Now, Frick is going to be married in 1881, and he and his wife are going to buy this house. It started out much smaller, but they rebuilt it, and then they named it along the way Clayton, which gets its name from his middle name. It's one of the great estates. It's the only one of the great estates from this neighborhood that still stands. This used to be known, Point Breeze, as Millionaire's Row. It's also considered to be among the most authentic Gilded Age mansions in the United States because it was always family owned. Helen Frick, Henry's daughter, was a great art collector, as was her father, and each of them created a namesake museum to display their collections. The Frick collection is in New York City, where the family moved in 1905. Back here in Pittsburgh, many years later, Helen, who still visited here often and came back to Pittsburgh for the last 7 years of her life, created the Frick Art Museum in the 1970s. And she's also responsible for Frick Park. When asked what gift she wanted at her debut at age 20, Helen requested that her father give a park to the people of Pittsburgh in his will. And Henry gave 151 acres to create that park across the street from their family home. If we pick just one name to associate with Pittsburgh, it would surely be Andrew Carnegie. By the time he retired, Carnegie Mills were producing more steel than the entire continent of Europe, and he was the wealthiest man in America. The key to that success was his willingness to adopt the latest technology to produce more and better steel than every other competitor. The greatest advance in steel making came with the blast furnace method of production developed by Henry Bessemer. Nearly every town that had a steel mill has a Bessemer Avenue or a Bessemer Street. An authentic Bessemer converter can be seen along the river at Station Square, a retail development inside an old railroad station. The Pennsylvania and Lake Erie Railroad initials can be seen on top of the building. And you can see that Bessemer converter and see how tall it is. Look at the two people standing below it. There were several Carnegie Mills in the region, but the most famous was the Homestead Works. The nearby town, like many others, was occupied almost exclusively by the workers at the factory. There were dozens of these mill towns or company towns all over Western PA, just like Homestead. When Carnegie and his manager, Henry Frick, tried to break the workers' union, the result was the most infamous strike in American labor history. Every history textbook talks about the Homestead strike, which happened here. Many locations related to the strike can be visited at the Waterfront Mall, which is on the former site of that famous mill. Named for the town where many of the players lived and worked, the Homestead Grays were the most famous team in the history of the Negro Leagues. They frequently played against another famous team from Pittsburgh, the Crawfords. In 2002, this bridge was renamed in honor of the Grays and is now known as the Homestead Grays Bridge. By the way, you can see the Waterfront Mall back in the background. Just a few weeks ago, this dramatic mural was unveiled on 9th Street in Homestead. It represents Josh Gibson, who is considered to be maybe the best baseball player who ever played the game for any league. I love these buildings that have public art on them. They are just so dramatic. And Pittsburgh has a number of them, and now a new one as of May 21st this year. Getting back to Andrew Carnegie, when he stopped making steel, he began to give away his money. He once said, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced." And he had a lot of causes, but primarily for education and science. Today, there are many institutions and foundations that bear his name, including the Science Center, located on the North Shore near the sports stadiums. A World War II submarine, the USS Requiem, is located here, and you can also take tours of it. This is a very popular spot for schools all over the tri-state area. Carnegie Music Hall in the Oakland area has hosted events since 1895. And if you enter the building on Forbes Avenue, you're going to pass another little local icon, Dippy. Dippy is a full-size 84-foot-long replica of a Diplodocus. The original fossil became the most famous dinosaur in history when Andrew Carnegie donated reproductions to museums in 9 world capitals. That dinosaur species was named for Carnegie, Diplodocus carnegii. Wouldn't that be great to have a dinosaur named after you? Well, you can see those dinosaurs, over 230 of them, in the Carnegie Natural History Museum nearby. That's not the only thing you can see, of course, there. There's the Carnegie Art Museum in the same Oakland neighborhood. And within sight of those two is the Carnegie Mellon University, which was created in 1967 with the jointure of the Carnegie Institute and the Mellon Institute, both of them science schools. The most legendary gift of Andrew Carnegie was the creation of hundreds of libraries all across the world. Here you see 2 of them in Oakland and Lawrenceville. There are 4 libraries in the Pittsburgh area. We're the only ones to receive a full endowment beyond just the cost to build them. And 3 of them are shown here, Braddock, Homestead, and Duquesne. The 4th is this one. In 1894, the boroughs of Mansfield and Chartiers petitioned for a library, and they made a unique offer to Andrew Carnegie. They would rename their town if they got one, and they got one. And that's why today we have a Carnegie, Pennsylvania. The library is a magnificent structure, and it also contains a fully restored room that was once used by the Thomas Espy branch of the GAR. That's a veterans group formed after the Civil War. It's unbelievable. Take a look at it if you ever have a chance. This is our second trivia question. How many libraries did Carnegie establish? When Henry Frick attempted to leave his partnership with Andrew Carnegie, it ended horribly. Neither man spoke to the other again. In 1902, Frick built a skyscraper, and according to the legend, he purposely located it in order to overshadow the shorter Carnegie building located nearby. This book title, you can see, is reputed to be the final words sent by messenger from Frick to Carnegie when Carnegie sent Frick a letter suggesting that they make amends. He said to Carnegie and told the messenger, "Tell Mr. Carnegie if he wants a meeting, I will meet him in hell, where we are both surely going." The fortune donated so freely by Carnegie was created when he sold all of his steel interests to J.P. Morgan. Morgan then creates the first billion-dollar corporation in history, United States Steel. In 1971, the US Steel building became the most prominent skyscraper in Pittsburgh and the headquarters of the company. Although they no longer own the building, they are still the largest tenant. The exterior frame was made with a new process called Core 10 steel that never needs painted. It oxidizes to a dark brown color, and then it stays that way, seemingly forever. The steel mark logo on the side of Steelers helmets was actually created for the American Iron and Steel Institute, which allowed the team to use it beginning in 1962. The letters ERS were added the following year. So now it says Steelers and not Steel. Our third question is, what is unique among all the teams in the National Football League about the Steelers helmet logo? And I think maybe I'll change hats at this point in the presentation. My father worked in a mill, so I'm going to now don an actual MSA hat, which comes from the mill, but it also happens to be decorated in Steeler colors. Across the river from the sports stadiums, you'll see two of the original inclined railways that once numbered at least 17 going up and down Mount Washington. One is named for the river at its base, and the other is named for the French fort. And they both are taken up and down the mountain many, many times every day by Roebling steel cables. Pittsburgh is a city of bridges, 446 to be exact. The most well-known are these three identical bridges on the Allegheny River just above the point. They were once known only by their street names, but now they are known by the names of Pittsburgh celebrities. So now the 9th Street Bridge, for instance, is known as the Rachel Carson Bridge. But we start at the lower end with Roberto Clemente. He's widely considered to be the best player in Pirate history and one of the most famous sports stars to ever play here in Pittsburgh. He died tragically in a plane crash, as some of you may even remember, while delivering relief supplies to hurricane-ravaged Nicaragua. Andy Warhol is given credit for creating not just a new style of art, but also our endless obsession with celebrities and their lives. Rachel Carson is considered the mother of the modern environmental movement. Her best-selling book, Silent Spring, led to the banning of DDT and a renewed awareness of the dangers of chemicals all around us. In addition to its dramatic appearance, this convention center, the David L. Lawrence Convention Center, located right by the bridges, was the first LED certified convention center in all of North America. This stunning sail-shaped structure is named for the only mayor of Pittsburgh to ever serve as the governor of Pennsylvania. But his enduring legacy is actually the complete reimagination of the city, skyline, and the riverfronts at the mid-century. This is a view of the crowded, dirty, chaotic city that greeted visitors in 1902. Note the two large bridges at the point. We're going to come back to this later. They literally came right to the point. Now, 50 years later, not much has changed. It pretty much looks like this. And Pittsburgh was known around the world as the Smoky City. It is said that at noon on many days, it was like midnight in downtown Pittsburgh. Businessmen, like those we've talked about, actually took a new shirt with them in their briefcases when they went into town to change after they got to the office. The transformation you see here was possible because David Lawrence had a remarkable talent for building political alliances. The Pittsburgh Renaissance was an alliance that was founded by Lawrence and this man, Richard King Mellon, one of the most prominent Republican leaders in Pennsylvania. The Mellons, there they are again. There were many plans put forth for the redevelopment of the city, but the winning design was developed by Charles Stotts, one of the founders of MCF Architects, the company who are hosting this program today. This is his original proposal. And I love this comment that I found from Mr. Stotts when he was talking about this project. He said, "We'll never get anywhere with those damn bridges where they are." Consider how much imagination it took for these city leaders to approve the demolition and the reconstruction of the entire center of the city along these lines. There was another plan, by the way, that was put forth. I'll just quickly mention. It was by a very famous architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. Look it up sometime. It's a horror to my eyes, but try and imagine, if you see a picture of it, what it must have been like if that had come to pass. In any case, it didn't. And here we have the Golden Triangle today. This is now extended beyond the original triangle into a new cultural and business district, the Benedum, Heinz Hall, and so many other venues. Today, the Pittsburgh city skyline is considered one of the most dramatic and beautiful in the world. I am personally amazed at how impressive the view is no matter which way you come into the city. Like this view from the Fort Pitt Tunnel or the view from the Liberty Tunnels. It just blows me away every time I drive in here, like I did today. The confluence of the three rivers is the name we give to this industrial wasteland, which was once occupied by across the river, it was once occupied by this stadium that you see in front of you. I'm getting ahead of myself, I apologize. This is the confluence of the three rivers and Point State Park, the lovely park that's associated with it. The outlines of the fort, once again, are in the ground there. Here's the stadium that I was referring to a moment ago. This stadium is one of the first multi-purpose stadiums, and they were all the rage in 1970. The football and baseball teams shared this one, named for the three rivers. Now we have a baseball park named for a major bank, and this is now a new trend, structures that are harkening back to the old days. This is not the first, Orioles Park was, but it is considered by many people to be the most beautiful, and the incredible view of the city is visible from most of the stadium. Another form of entertainment evolved when people looked for ways to escape these filthy cities, and Pittsburgh was no different. Kenny's Woods was originally a farm owned by Anthony Kenny, who leased this to a trolley company. Trolley companies at that time had a problem making money on weekends when nobody rode to work. The solution was to provide a place for family amusement at the end of the line. Kennywood became just one example of a trolley park. They quickly sprang up all over America, and there were dozens built here in Western PA. One of the all-time favorite rides at Kennywood is the Ferris wheel. In 1999, it was removed, which is very odd considering this famous ride was invented here in Pittsburgh. Organizers of the Chicago World's Fair were looking for a new amusement to rival the Eiffel Tower from the Paris Exposition, 4 years earlier. How to possibly beat the Eiffel Tower? Well, George Ferris met the challenge with his gigantic 264-foot high revolving wheel. It was the highlight of the fair with tens of thousands of riders. This is a close-up view of some of the 36 cars that took passengers for a 20-minute ride. And our fourth question, is how many people could ride this at the same time? How many at the same time? Ferris lived on the north side, which at that time was known as Allegheny City, and his house is actually located in an area that is known as the Mexican War Streets, because many of these streets are named for battles of the war or leaders. You can see them listed in red for the battles and black for the leaders. Ferris House is located there. And as we move back downtown, we're going to run into a marker that's all that's left of this location. It was a theater that was started on Smithfield Street by a man named Harry Davis in 1901. Now, Harry charged 5 cents admission for his theater on Smithfield Street, and thus he created a new name for all the theaters that charged a nickel to go watch a movie. Today, you see pictures of the interior of this famous Nickelodeon, and there's a photograph there of the sign above its entrance. And newer generations now associate that name with the first cable television channel designed for children, Nickelodeon. We're going to go outdoors and out of the city of Pittsburgh north to my area. And we're going to talk about this man, Frank Preston. For those who enjoy outdoor recreation, you owe him a tremendous debt. An avid outdoorsman, Mr. Preston and a group of his friends formed the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy in 1932. They are pictured there, overlooking an area that will later become the most famous of all their projects, this one, Moraine State Park. Over the next several decades, this group is going to work tirelessly to develop recreation areas all over Western PA. And this huge park is created by flooding an area and recreating a giant glacial lake that once sat on this area from the last ice ages. The glacier covered half of North America and finally stopped moving right here in Western PA. The name for the end of a glacier, which is what we live in, is called a terminal moraine. And that's where the park gets its name. The very large lake that was created by damming Muddy Creek is named for one of the original partners who did not live to see it completed, Edmund Watts Arthur. Some locations where outdoor enthusiasts can enjoy the great outdoors. Jennings Education Center and Nature Reserve and Blazing Star, which is unique to this region, exists just there. Otto Emery Jennings is who it's named after. Maurice Goddard has a park named after him, Goddard State Park. And Jane Preston in the Butler area donated the land on which their house and laboratory once stood, and it's now Preston Park in Butler Township. And finally, we come to a brand new story. Frank Preston's name will be carried on by the brand new excursion boat that was just launched at Moraine State Park a couple of weeks ago. And this brings us to our next to last story. We end near the beginning by coming back to that man, William Flynn. The road that's named after him actually originates south of Pittsburgh near the Wilkinsburg exit, and it moves almost directly north until it ends in Erie, Pennsylvania. William Flynn Highway is another name for Route 8. Now, Flynn is a powerful political leader in the state legislature, but he made his money actually building infrastructure projects. The most well-known Flynn Company creations are 3 tunnels in Pittsburgh, as a matter of fact, the final one being the Liberty Tubes, and also a very famous tunnel, the Holland Tunnel in New York City. I might mention a side note, Flynn's longtime political ally in the state legislature was Republican boss of Allegheny County, Christopher McGee, who donated his mother's house for the creation of a woman's hospital that is known far and wide today, McGee Hospital. Our final story, we're going to travel to Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and we're going to visit the Cascade Theater, which still stands in downtown Newcastle. And we're going to talk about 4 brothers who started that theater in 1907, Harry, Sam, Albert, and Jack. Now, they found great success, so much so that they decided to go to the movie hotbed of Hollywood in 1923. And we know them today by their collective name, the Warner Brothers. That's Jack on the far right. Now, people of a certain age like me can recall spending every Saturday morning watching these Warner creations on the television. These characters remain as popular today as they were decades ago. And so it's time that we end our show with the immortal words of Porky Pig. That's all, folks. We hope that all of you are now inspired to look with fresh eyes at the world around you and think about the fantastic people like MCF who helped to build it. I'm the History Hobo. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. You can find information about me at thehistoryhobo.com, my Facebook page, and my website. At this time, we have trivia. So
the answers that we got for the first question about the photo of the people looking down on the World Series game, we had 3 people answer correctly, which was Tim, Sherry, and Robert, and it was the Cathedral of Learning. So great job to all of you on that one. In terms of the number of libraries that were built by Carnegie, we had Tim, who came back with 1,500, Elena 11 or 12, Robert just said hundreds, and Jamie said 583. The true number is 2,509. The third question, in terms of the logo on the Steelers helmet, the logo is only on the left side. Alan said it was only on one side, and we had Maureen say it was the only one with diamonds. And then last but not least, and this one actually surprised me the most, I shared this with my family last night after Steve quizzed us all yesterday on this, in regard to the Ferris wheel. So the number of people that could ride on the original Ferris wheel at once, Elena said her answer was 999, Robert said 1,200, Betsy 600, and then someone else said 760, but it was a staggering 2,160, which is really, really something, and I'm sure Steve could share a little bit more about any one of those fun facts. So thank you all for participating in our trivia.
Well, thank you, Melissa, for reading off our winning answers. I don't know if anybody noticed in the background of that photograph of the Cathedral of Learning, but you could actually see Forbes Field in the background. The Ferris wheel had 32 cars, which all held, like small houses, 60 people. That's how you get 2,160 people on the Ferris wheel at the same time. So with that, I'm happy to stick around. And by the way, the logo, which way am I turning here, is on the left here. I'm happy to stick around for questions as long as we have some. Please put them in the chat and I will do my very best to answer them. I make no guarantees, however.
So one of the questions that we have from Elena is she's curious as to, in all the research that you've done on this presentation, out of all these people, which person is really one of your favorites?
Yeah, I had mentioned it. I sort of alluded to it earlier. Henry Heinz is just my idol, because of his attitude towards so many things, which is so current, so modern, and how we think today. And it was so rare at that time, really rare. So yeah, great question. Thank you.
Do you happen to have a second runner-up aside from Heinz?
Frank Preston, probably, because he's a local guy, but so few people in the area where I live in Butler know him or know about him. And yet that gigantic park that we all enjoy so much, he was the driving force behind it. They had to cap over 400 dead oil wells to be able to fill that lake. And just so many other reclamation projects had to be done. It took decades. And he was the driving force behind that, and so many others. That group, the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, Falling Water, the Old Stone House, McConnell's Mills, Beechwood Farms, that group, they're responsible for all of those. It's an amazing group of people, and Frank Preston was one of them. Thank you for the question. Any others?
Yeah, I have another one.
Okay.
So you had mentioned something in passing about sawdust being placed in a ketchup bottle. Yeah. And in today's world of preservatives, I have to know whoever thought that was a good idea.
It's really incredible. I used to teach this when I was teaching the kids, and they were appalled and amazed. Medicines were especially horrendous. There were all kinds of patent medicines. They were marketed as cures for everything. In fact, you can buy them in the Sears catalogs. If you ever get one of those reproduction catalogs, you can find them in there, but they don't tell you what the ingredients are. But a lot of those patent medicines, for instance, had morphine and even heroin as ingredients. There was a cough syrup that had morphine in it. And I always think when I talk to the kids about that, no wonder you felt better. Your cough went away. Of course it did. You're stoned. But that was common. And, the Pure Food and Drug Act was not widely accepted at the time. And Heinz was one of the first industrial leaders to say, we have to have this. These things are just not safe that people were eating. Thank you for the question. That was a great one.
Does anybody else have any other questions or any other thoughts that they'd like to share, whether it's about Point State Park or any of the buildings that were in Steve's presentation?
Yeah, I'll be glad to tell you what I can. And I didn't really add a lot of illustrations simply because I was concerned about time and I wanted to spread things out, but we could have an entire presentation on the cultural district itself. The theaters down there are just incredible renovations and restorations. And again, I'm not trying to plug this company because they're the hosts. It's because of the fantastic work that they've done in the city of Pittsburgh, along with other architecture firms, I'm sure. But Heinz Hall and the Benedum are just glorious restorations of those old movie theaters, by the way, if you didn't know where they came from. I have an entire program on the old movie theaters, and they're just incredible structures. I go in there for a program and I'm just looking around at them. I wish we had more time to even include them today.
Yeah, one of the things, once I met Steve and we got to talking, he had no idea about all the connections
Not a clue.
between NCF architecture and Edward Scott's and Point Park. So it's been a real delight to get to know him and actually get to know a lot more about the history of the city and the integral part that the founders of our firm actually have played in that.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's an incredible story. Again, just imagine all of these civic leaders saying, yeah, let's just tear down half the town and rebuild it. I mean, the kind of imagination that they had to have. Again, the Mellons, the Heinzes, the other families, the philanthropists who had those visions, and the people like the architects who built those visions into reality.
Okay.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Well, thank you again so very much for the invitation. It's been a pleasure.
Steve, thank you so much. That was just really great. So many details about our past and our community's shared past that you see every day, and no one ever really like stops to appreciate just all of the history and contributions that people who came before us made. Really want to thank you for your input. I'd really like to thank everybody in the audience today for joining us for that great presentation. It means a lot, and we really appreciate it. Please join us next month for our third installment of the Inspire Speaker Series. We will be featuring Greg Powers, who is an internationally known engineer in renewable energy for Halliburton Incorporated out of Houston. Greg has devoted much of his life to studying new technologies for transferring and storing energy. And I think he has a really interesting and pretty incredible perspective on the possibilities for the next 20 years. So please join us for that. Look for the invite. And again, thank you all for joining us today. It was really great having you. And thank you, Steve, for such a great presentation. Okay. Have a good day.